This is a presentation that was put together by Greg Waldron. He's an environmental scientist with the Department of Environmental Quality here in Louisiana. He typically comes and gives this presentation when we have these trainings set up across the state, and he talks about the non-point source program and some of the things that DEQ is involved in. Some of this is going to be kind of repetitive of what we've talked about already, but the point source pollution comes from identified point or location, such as an industrial plant. This is a picture of end of the pipe, like we talked about earlier. It's also regulated, which means you must have a permit in order to discharge that water from that facility. So what is non-point source? Again, it does not come from a point source such as a pipe. Any type of runoff from parking lots, highways, golf courses, your homes, anything like that, any type of runoff that can pick up contaminants, sediments, bacteria, nutrients, things like that is considered non-point source pollution. It moves across the land, picks up contaminants. This is EPA testing Katrina floodwaters, which I'm sure was extremely polluted. So what kind of pollutants are picked up from the ground? You've got nutrients, pathogens, sediment, and we're going to talk more in depth about those in the BMP presentation later on, but you've also got toxic substances. So there's a lot of potential contaminants that are picked up in waters that are running off all of these surfaces across the land that end up in our waters. Some of them are caused by human activity, some of them are naturally, such as waste from wildlife and other types of erosion. There's virtually nothing that we can do about some of this. You've got rain and irrigation, obviously that's putting a lot of water on the landscape, pushing some of those contaminants and pollutants off. And if there's not anything to slow them down or stop them, eventually end up in our creeks, our bayous, our water bodies, causing a lot of problems. Farming, obviously, again, when we talked about the land use map for the state, a majority of our state is used for agriculture. So, there are potential issues that we have to address because there's a lot of nutrients, a lot of pesticides and herbicides that are being, applied to these fields. And if there's not some sort of, again, filter strip or some of these other BMPs that are put in place, like conservation tillage and things like that, it has the potential for a lot of this to run off and get into our water bodies. Livestock, they can contribute pathogens and nutrients, cause soil erosion. If you have livestock, you're probably aware of some of the issues that you have in your pastures, maybe around water troughs. If you've got any creeks or rivers or anything that run through your property with erosion, obviously some pathogens and nutrients, a lot of erosion and sedimentation can get into those waters, causing problems as well. Urban areas, a lot of times we drive by places like this and we don't pay any attention. It doesn't mean anything to us. Well, all of the water that stands on the side of the road or in these ditches in municipalities and places like that can contribute chemicals, oil, gas, fertilizer, dog poop, soil, roadkill, everything that ends up on the landscape, has the potential to cause problems if it gets into our water bodies. Construction sites, that is completely bare soil. When rain hits bare soil, what do you think happens? It causes a lot of erosion. A lot of that sediment, any type of metals that may be in that soil, nutrients, debris, and other pollutants, they wash right off of there and go directly into water bodies if there's not some type of practice in place, like fencing and things like that, that may slow it down or filter it out. Harvesting timber, which is logging strips of land or vegetation causing erosion. Obviously, that has a lot of potential. A lot of our state is used for forestry. There's a lot of logging that goes on. They actually have a master logger program that the master farmer program was kind of tailored after that was addressing some of this because they knew it was a problem. There was a lot of erosion. A lot of the land was left open, that was not protected. And so they began that program looking at what BMPs they could put in place to address some of those. Failing septic tanks, obviously we have a lot of subdivisions, a lot of urban areas across the state, around our cities and towns. You know, septic systems can be a problem when nutrients and pathogens come from malfunctioning septic tanks. And obviously they get out and they run through your yard and into the ditch and in canals and places like that. So, you know, that also contributes to our water quality issues. In many other ways that water falls on the ground, whether it's washing your car, you know, cooking, you know, you're dumping your leftover fertilizer or some type of chemicals in your kitchen down the drain. I mean, you know, a lot of us have done those things over the years, not really thinking what the impact could be. This is just to kind of remind you that everything you do when it comes to water, you know, has an impact somewhere down the road. So how do you know if it's too polluted? Water samples, you know, obviously if you're very concerned, you can take your own water samples. We've got 2 or 3 labs. We've got 2 labs here on the Baton Rouge campus, the Ag Chemistry and the Caligari lab, that test water samples. If you're concerned about your water, they do not test drinking water. You have to send that to a private lab. But they look at things like dissolved oxygen, fecal coliform, bacteria, phosphorus, nitrogen, temperature, turbidity, and pH. So what do those tests tell us? Basically, if you've ever seen a soil test, not a soil test, a water test result, which is kind of like a soil test, they have to fall within a certain range. But if they don't, that water body is not meeting its criteria or not supporting its designated use, as James talked about earlier. So what are these designated uses? And every water body has a designated use, and sometimes it's more than one. It may not be just primary contact recreation. It may be more than that. But you have primary and secondary contact recreation, fish and wildlife propagation, drinking water supply, which is obviously very important, oyster propagation, agriculture, which is like for irrigation purposes, and then you have outstanding natural resources. So what's primary contact recreation and your designated use? Basically, it's where you're in direct contact with the water, such as water skiing, swimming. You're directly in contact, whether it's your whole body or part of your body, in contact with that water. Secondary is something like an occasional contact with water, like if you're fishing, if you're wading, boating. It says building sandcastles. Anytime the water may, you know, get on some part of your body, but you're not submerged in it. You have fish and wildlife propagation, which obviously we live in sportsman's paradise. That's what we're called. So, you know, our waters need to be clean enough for fish and wildlife so people can come here and fish and hunt and all the other things that they enjoy in our state. So how do we stop all this pollution? Again, we're looking at it from a non-point pollution standpoint, so we have to use the best management practices because that's really all we have. They're the best means of reducing the non-point pollution that's being carried into our water bodies. So how can they control non-point source pollution? In various ways, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but basically it's decreasing the amount of runoff by retaining the water until it evaporates or soaks into the ground or is absorbed by plants. So those are the things that you want it to do before that runoff can actually get into the water. Is the quality of runoff by filtering out the pollutants. So you have urban BMPs. This is a rain garden. They have rain barrels, save the rain for a sunny day. We actually have some of these rain barrels at the Dean Lee Research Station in Alexandria, which it just catches the water coming off of the roof and it collects it in a barrel, and that water can be used to water the plants, you know, at a later date. Instead of that water running off of the roofs and just basically running out in the parking lot or running into the ditch. Clean up pet waste. You know, this is not as big an issue in the rural areas of the state, but in urban areas, you know, obviously they want people to pick this up so it doesn't get washed into our waterways as well. If you have a septic tank or septic system, make sure it works properly, obviously for multiple reasons. This is, if you look in the picture, it says that's toilet paper from the absence of a septic tank. So you don't want to get in that kind of situation. So just make sure your septic system is working properly. There's construction BMPs. Again, you see this along the highway especially. They're called silt fences. You know, basically it is there to catch the silt or sediment running off of some type of construction site, whether it's road construction, whether it's building construction. These can do a really good job at preventing a lot of that sediment from washing out over, as you can see, the crosswalk or the sidewalk into, you know, some type of drainage. You can see the one on the left has no protection. Then you have an erosion control blanket. There's a lot of erosion going on the left side of your screen. The soil is there. It's unprotected. There's a pretty steep slope. So when you get rainfall, especially heavy rain, what's going to happen? It's going to take that sediment, it's going to take the soil and push it off site, causing problems somewhere else. Forestry, again, has a lot of BMPs. We're not going to go through all of them, but you know, some of them basically say that the roads should not be built on soils or steep slopes. When roads are no longer needed, they should be closed and revegetated. So whenever they cut trees or they make roads, the best management practices are to go in and, you know, cover that soil up. Don't leave it exposed. Don't leave it bare to the elements. Agricultural BMPs, which there's a lot of them. Livestock can cause serious erosion on stream banks and also deposit fecal matter in the water. So if you fence them out of the stream, you have to provide them with an alternate source of water and shade. And as James talked about, with all the rivers and streams we have in our watersheds across the state, we have over 10,000 named water bodies. That is a tremendous amount of water to have to take care of, basically to try to keep clean. You know, and if you have livestock, that may be their only watering source. But if that happens, you know, you're looking at the potential for a lot of erosion, a lot of sediment, a lot of nutrients, fecal material getting into those water bodies and being carried downstream. Concrete water troughs. Installing water trough with a concrete pad will help prevent the surrounding soil from eroding. The picture on the top left, I'm sure that's a very common picture in Louisiana. I've seen it several times, especially in the winter when it rains a lot. They get around, you know, a hay ring or a water trough and it just gets really sloppy, muddy, you know, so when the water comes and the rain comes, then a lot of that sediment, fecal material is washed off as well. So putting in one of these concrete pads helps to prevent some of that from happening. Cover crops grow when fields would otherwise be bare. They reduce the amount of soil nutrients that are washed away, and we're going to talk more about that later, but this is something that has definitely grown in interest in Louisiana over the last few years. Cover crops have been around for years and years and years, but they've kind of gone away. The interest has gone away, then it's come back. Well, now it's back for various reasons, but there's a tremendous amount of work being done by the Ag Center and other agencies involved that are looking at cover crops, not just what to plant, but the soil type, the seeding rate, you know, whether they're a single or they're a mixture, and what crops they need to be planted to get the most benefit. So cover crops can really go a long way in helping to increase that sustainability, improve your soil health and things like that. Conservation tillage is another BMP. This is kind of been something that's been around for a long time. We don't have nearly as much conventional tillage as we used to. This has happened for a lot of reasons. The producers don't want to spend the money to constantly cultivate or till their fields if they don't have to. But I think they also recognize the fact that they were losing a lot of their topsoil. So if they implement some type of conservation tillage, you're leaving some type of residue left on the ground, and the new crops are planted with a minimum tillage in the soil. So you're not disturbing the soil unless you have to. Pipe drop structures. This is obviously very predominant, especially in the rice fields and also in livestock operations. But they're put in to safely deliver water down a stream bank without causing erosion and deep gullies, as you can see on the right. Putting these in addresses the problem of erosion, allows the water to flow pretty straightforward into whatever receiving, you know, ditch or water body that you need. So they also LDEQ deals with the 319 section of the Clean Water Act, and the amendments in 1987 established this 319 program. And basically what it does, it supports a wide variety of activities activities, including technical assistance, financial assistance, education, training, technology transfer, demonstration projects, and monitoring to assess the success of non-point source projects. The Master Farmer Program, when it was first started in 2001, got or received one of these 319 grants where we actually bought some equipment and monitoring and started monitoring on some farms across the state, looking at water quality from different operations that had BMPs implemented and some that didn't, just to try to start collecting data. And the 319 funding project was one that actually made this possible. Now, Louisiana's non-point source program, I'm not going to go into it very much. There's a tremendous amount of information on their website, or you can contact Greg if you have any questions about it. But this was federally supported by the Clean Water Act from the Section 319 funding, like we talked about. The funds are divided between DEQ and Department of Ag and Forestry for these projects. DEQ provides the planning, assessment, monitoring, sampling, inspections with the education and outreach, and LDEQ provides the planning, the BMP implementation, and also education outreach. So they work together on these programs to implement them for different monitoring projects across the state. Louisiana's non-point source management process, they have a watershed selection process. They assess the agricultural, operation in that area. The water body characterization, they do assessment of the water quality conditions, the quarterly assessment with partners, BMP implementation, long-term water quality assessment, because obviously that's something that's important. Whatever practices you put in place, you want them to be effective, not just now, but years down the road. And what type of water quality restoration there's going to be with that. Again, I didn't want to go into too much detail about that, but contacting with any of these people listed, you can get on LDEQ's website and look up the program if you'd like more information about maybe some projects or programs that are going on near where you live or farm.